Chapter 6. Wolf woke with a start at the sound of howling from outside. He jumped to his feet and grabbed his sword, taking a moment to get his bearings. Arnon howled again, and he ran to the open window and looked out in time to see Winifred riding over the drawbridge at breakneck speed, on his horse. She still donned the red cloak, and it billowed out behind her in the breeze. It was his guess that the wolf was trapped somewhere in the mews, since the door to the mews was closed, and he heard the fluttering of wings and the cry of his falcons and hawks all the way up to his solar window. "Damn! I should have tied her to the bed," he mumbled, hurriedly dressing and putting his weapons into place. The door to his solar burst open, and in ran his squire, Dolan, waving his hands in the air. "My lord, the girl has escaped!" "I know." He calmly fastened his belt. "She's also locked your wolf in the mews. Tricked him, she did. She lured him in there by throwing one of those sausages from the kitchen inside and slamming the door behind him." "I know," he said once again, having read Arnon's mind all the way from across the courtyard. "Now stop telling me what I already know and go saddle me a horse, Dolan." "Are you going after her?" "Of course." He made a face and shook his head. "Did you think I was going out for a joyride? Now hurry." "My lord, she will be long gone before you even leave the courtyard. Perhaps you should just... if you... It would be faster and easier to just..." Dolan looked to the ground at his foot when he spoke, rather than meet Wolf's eyes. The boy was obviously insinuating it would be faster and easier if he just shapeshifted and tracked her on all fours. It was exactly what he planned on doing, but didn't like to shift into his wolf form in front of his knights or the ladies of the castle, even if everyone knew he could do it. He felt like a fool for sleeping and letting the girl trick him as well as his wolf. But her hands on his bare skin had felt so good that it had not only distracted him, but also made him feel very relaxed. All he could think of was the way she spread the cream on him with small sensual circles of her fingers. He knew Arnon must have been distracted as well, and his wolf's craving for meat had gotten the better of him. He would have to do something about this girl soon, because she'd just foiled more than one of his plans. Winifred rode the large warhorse through the woods, looking back over her shoulder, knowing it wouldn't be long before Wolf came for her. He wasn't going to take it well that she not only tricked his wolf, but deceived him, too. It was getting late, and the sun would be rising soon. She had to get back to the castle before her grandfather awoke and realized she was gone. She also had to have her own horse when she returned. It was bad enough she'd be returning without her grandfather's cloak, and he'd be questioning her as to why she was wearing red. She was sure her grandfather would be amongst the first to notice the war horse hidden in his stable, draped in trappings that boasted the crest of Lord Hugh de Bar. She rode to the knoll where she'd last seen her horse and quickly dismounted. She looked around and saw her steed munching on the grass behind a tree. Her crossbow was still slung over the pommel of the saddle. Thank goodness it's still here. She held the horse's rein in one hand and was heading over to her mount when she heard a muffled voice cry out from somewhere. "Help me! Use the key and open the door!" She looked around and once again saw the mystical door in the knoll. Dawn was just starting to break. With the lightening sky, she saw the outline of the wood. She wrapped the reins around a tree branch and hurried over to the knoll. She stood on tiptoes and found the key hiding above the doorframe again and gripped it tightly in her fingers. "I've got it," she called back. "I'll open the door for you. Are you trapped?" "Do it quickly. He's coming," said the voice. She looked back over her shoulder and listened, but couldn't hear the sound of hoofbeats through the woods. Still, she put the odd-looking iron key into the lock and turned. Slowly, she heard the tumblers inside the lock falling into place, and then the thunk that told her it had been a success. With the key still embedded, she pushed open the door and gasped when she saw a beautiful young woman about her age standing there with a hand mirror. The woman looked up from admiring herself in the mirror and smiled. Then she placed the mirror down on the dressing table. "You did it. You opened the door. Now come inside." "Who are you? And who did this to you?" Winifred took a cautious step over the threshold and jumped in surprise as a mouse ran over her feet and out the door. She took in her surroundings. She was in a small underground room with long walls and a wooden floor. There was a hearth with a burning fire, but no flue to vent the flames. Still, no smoke filled the room at all. There was a bed in the corner with long black hanging curtains around it, and a dressing table with some jars on it. A chair was in front of the dressing table, and there was a second chair across the room. An old tunic hung from a nail on the wall, but besides this, there wasn't much of anything else. "I am Sheena, the fair maiden of Dartmoor. I've been trapped in here by a very evil man." "Really? I've never heard of you. Who trapped you?" She walked over and sat down on the chair and eyed the odd jars on the table. "How long have you been in here?" She opened a jar and took a sniff, and almost retched since it smelled so bad. Then she peeked into another one and closed the lid fast when she saw unusual objects that she couldn't identify inside. "I've been here very long. 1 year now," came the girl's answer. "I've seen my grandfather's guard bring you food every day. Why haven't you tried to escape?" She picked up the hand mirror and ran her fingers over the ornate etchings of the handle. It was made of a rare metal and decorated with a raised face of a cherub with small wings on its back, as well as horns on its head. Odd indeed. "Your grandfather is the one who trapped me in here." She almost dropped the mirror when she heard that. "Nay," she shook her head. "My grandfather is many things, and most of them not nice, but he'd never trap a beautiful young maiden inside a secret room in the ground." "Oh, you're mistaken. He did do it." "If so, mayhap he had a good reason." The mirror vibrated in her hand. When she glanced over at it, the reflective surface became clouded. When it became clear again, she held it up and looked at her own reflection. Her eyes grew wide in fright, not because of her own image, but because of the woman's image she saw in the mirror. It was of the girl standing behind her across the room. However, the young girl wasn't a young girl at all. She was an old, ugly, withered hag that was bent over, nearly bald, and missing teeth. "Nay!" She threw down the mirror and jumped to her feet. Then she turned around with her hand to her chest. "Oh, you saw me in the mirror, didn't you?" asked the girl. "Who are you?" "I am the great warlord's lover." She shifted from her beautiful form into that of her true self, an old evil hag. Winifred's legs became shaky. She stumbled backward, holding onto the table to steady herself. "You tricked my grandfather, just like you tricked me."
"He's the one with the tricks, and I assure you, he will pay for it."
You did something else, didn't you? That's why he put you in here."
"I did. I ruined his plans when I cursed his prisoners 1 year ago. I had 2 wolves ready to do my bidding, but you had to go and set them free."
"I didn't know. Honest, I didn't. I only saw 1 wolf and a man. I was trying to save their lives."
"Well, now that you've opened the door and entered, you have enabled me to continue what I started."
She came forward, as if floating over the ground, and her eyes bore fire. What had she done by opening the door? "Wait! If you're a witch, why haven't you been able to break out of this room by yourself?"
"There was a protection spell placed on this hidden hovel, and it couldn't be broken until someone opened the door and stepped over the threshold."
"But the guard brings you food each day. Surely he's already entered."
"He throws the food over the threshold, but never steps inside."
"Nay," she shook her head furiously. "I don't believe any of this. My grandfather is just a mighty warlord, not an evil warlock able to place spells."
"Nothing is ever as it seems, my dear. People aren't always as they appear to be."
"Is that why he caged and whipped Lord Hugh de Bar and that wolf? Because he's not the man I think he is?"
"Your grandfather is weak, though you may not think so. He never was smart, except for figuring out how to trap me and bind my powers.
So, are you powerless right now?
Almost. But I'll get my powers back now that you're here. You've got the same blood running through you as the man who bound my powers. So a little taste of your blood, and I'll regain what I've lost.
Her hand shot out, and she grabbed the dagger from Winifred's belt. Then she held it up and lunged forward. Winifred jumped to the side, but the old hag was fast and strong. She managed to nick Winifred's arm, drawing blood in the process. "Nay, leave me alone!" Winifred cried out in horror, wishing she had her crossbow on her.
"Ah!"
the woman said, taking a deep breath, studying the blood on the dagger's blade.
"With a little taste of the blood of the man who deceived me, I'll be able to leave this prison."
She cackled and smiled a toothless smile, reaching out her tongue and running it across the flat part of the blade.
Your blood is thick and rich. Still, it's not enough to gain back all I've lost. I'm weak from being locked in here for so long, so I'll need more."
"Don't touch me!" cried out Winifred. The witch lunged for her with a crazed look in her eyes, the dagger slicing through the air. A growl came from the door. A huge wolf bolted into the room, with its jaws snapping. It jumped through the air, right at the old hag, but by the time it landed, the old woman had disappeared in a puff of green smoke. Winifred screamed again and ran for the door. This wolf wasn't Arnon. It was black, not brown. It was much larger and looked to be twice as mean. She needed to move to the safety of her horse and get her crossbow as well. She hurried out the door and ran to her horse, mounting just as the wolf ran up, snapping at her heels. From atop the horse, she grabbed her crossbow and pushed a bolt into place, raising it up and aiming it directly at the big black wolf. Her fingers quivered. When she saw the sun's rays hit the glassy eyes of the wolf, she stopped, unable to release the bolt. Something about this wolf seemed so familiar. Something in its steel-gray eyes looked a lot like Lord Hugh de Bar. She slowly lowered the crossbow, her eyes still interlocked with the wolf's eyes. Then another wolf came bolting through the underbrush, followed by someone on horseback. She turned and kicked her heels into the sides of her horse and quickly rode back to Castle Chaserton, where she would have to deal with her grandfather now, instead of these vicious wolves.